Elena sat by the window, her hands gently resting on her swollen belly, as she watched the rain drizzle against the glass. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops was oddly comforting, yet her heart ached with a feeling she couldn't quite explain. It had been years since she first met Derek, the man she once believed was her soulmate. She still remembered the way his eyes sparkled with passion when he first held her hand, promising her a life filled with love and security. Their love story had been nothing short of magical, meeting in college, late-night study sessions that turned into whispered confessions, and eventually a wedding that felt like a fairy tale. Every moment had been filled with laughter, adventure, and dreams of a future they would build together. But now, as she sat alone in their once warm home, something felt off. Derek had changed. The man who used to hold her close every night, kissing her forehead before bed, now barely looked her in the eye. She tried to shake off the gnawing doubt creeping into her mind. Perhaps it was just the stress of impending fatherhood, she reasoned. After all, they were about to become parents, a dream they had cherished for years. Taking a deep breath, Elena glanced at the framed wedding photo on the bedside table. In it, she and Derek stood beaming, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Where had that man gone? Lately, he had become distant, spending more time outside than at home. And when he was home, his attention was elsewhere, his phone, his work, anything but her. "You're just overthinking," she whispered to herself, forcing a smile. She was determined to believe in their love, to trust that everything was fine. Just then, the front door opened and Derek walked in, shaking off his umbrella. "You're home early today," she said, a hopeful edge in her voice. He barely looked at her as he mumbled, "Yeah, long day, no kiss, no affectionate greeting." Just those cold words before he disappeared into the bedroom. Elena's smile faltered as she absent-mindedly rubbed her belly. Their child would be here soon, but the man she loved was slipping away. Elena sat in the dimly lit living room, her hands absent-mindedly resting on her growing belly. It had become a routine, waiting for Derek to come home, only to be met with cold indifference or excuses. In the beginning, she convinced herself that his long hours were just a result of work stress. But now, the signs were too glaring to ignore. His cologne smelled different, not the usual woody scent she was accustomed to, but something floral and sweet. His phone, once left carelessly on the table, was now always locked away in his pocket. The intimacy between them had dwindled to nothing, no warm embraces, no lingering kisses, not even casual conversations over dinner. Each night she lay alone in their king-size bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. The Derek she had known would rush home to her, eager to rub her feet, after a long day, excitedly talking about baby names. Now he barely acknowledged her existence. The silence between them was suffocating, and Elena felt as if she were screaming in a room where no one could hear her. One evening she decided to confront him, determined to get answers. As soon as he stepped through the door, she met him in the hallway, her eyes searching his face. "Derek, can we talk?" she asked, her voice gentle yet firm. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Elena, I'm exhausted. Can this wait?" The irritation in his tone stung, but she refused to back down. "No, it can't," she insisted. "You barely talk to me anymore. You're always out. And when you're home, it's like I'm invisible. What's going on?" Derek scoffed, shaking his head. "You're being paranoid again," he muttered, brushing past her. But Elena wasn't letting it go this time. Paranoid. "Derek, I'm your wife and I'm carrying your child. If something is wrong, I have the right to know." He turned to face her, his expression cold. "Not everything is about you, Elena. Maybe if you stopped acting so needy, things wouldn't feel so suffocating." His words cut through her like a knife. Elena felt the tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she watched as he walked away, disappearing into their bedroom without another word. That night, as she curled up on the couch, she realized something. Her marriage was falling apart, and she was the only one trying to hold it together. The uneasy feeling in Elena's stomach had grown into something impossible to ignore. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in a way that made her heart pound in dread. Derek's late nights, The distant looks, the dismissive responses. He wasn't just busy, he was hiding something. She wanted to believe it was work stress, but deep down, she knew better. The final confirmation came when Maya, her closest friend, hesitantly called her one evening. "Elena, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how." There was an edge of hesitation in her voice that made Elena grip the phone tighter. "Just say it, Maya," she urged, her chest tightening. A deep sigh followed before Maya whispered, "Derek has been seen around town with another woman." Elena's world tilted. She pressed a hand against her belly, her mind racing. No, that can't be. But even as she denied it, she knew in her heart it was true. Maya continued, her voice laced with regret. "Elena, I wouldn't have told you if I wasn't sure. I saw them myself, laughing, holding hands. She's young, beautiful. And they looked like more than just friends." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but anger burned hotter. When Derek walked through the door that night, she was waiting. He barely glanced at her before heading to the bedroom, but she followed, refusing to be ignored. "Who is she?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. Derek stopped mid-step, his body stiffening. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but the defensiveness in his voice gave him away. "Don't lie to me, Derek. I know about her. Who is she?" The moment stretched between them like a fragile thread ready to snap. Then Derek smirked a smirk that made Elena's stomach churn. "You're always so dramatic," he scoffed. "I don't have time for your hormonal paranoia." His dismissal was like a slap across her face. "I am your wife, Derek," she shouted. "I deserve the truth." He turned to her, his eyes void of the love they once held. "Fine," he said coldly. "Her name is Renee. And if you must know, I care about her more than I care about you." Elena staggered back as if physically hit. The man she had loved, the father of her unborn child, had just admitted without a hint of remorse that he had replaced her. The pain of Derek's betrayal was unbearable, but what hurt even more was the ease with which he had dismissed her. She had spent years loving him, sacrificing for him, believing in their future, and now she was nothing more than an inconvenience in his eyes. For days she went through the motions, her body heavy with exhaustion and heartbreak, but something inside her refused to remain broken. She needed proof, something undeniable that would confirm what she already knew. One evening, as Derek slept soundly beside her after barely saying a word all day, she reached for his phone. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it, surprised that he hadn't changed his password. What she found made her stomach lurch. Messages from Renee filled the screen. "I can't wait for you to finally leave her. Do you think she suspects yet? Our trip next weekend will be perfect. Just us." Elena's breath hitched as she scrolled further: hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, restaurant bills. All for Renee. The anger that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever felt before. When Derek woke up the next morning, she was waiting. "How long?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. He frowned, rubbing his eyes. "What? How long have you been cheating on me?" she clarified, holding up his phone. His face darkened. "Elena, give me my phone." She pulled away. "I read everything, Derek. You were planning a getaway with her while I sit at home, carrying your child. Do you even have a conscience?" He exhaled sharply, grabbing the phone from her hand. "You had no right to snoop through my phone." That was all he had to say. Not an apology, not regret, just anger that he had been caught. Elena stared at him, her hands instinctively going to her belly. "I loved you," she whispered, voice cracking. "I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for her." Derek rolled his eyes. "You need to focus on the baby and stop stressing yourself." The sheer audacity of his words made her want to scream. But instead she stood taller. She would not break. Not for him. Elena sat in the nursery, gently folding the tiny clothes she had spent months picking out with so much love and excitement. The pastel-colored onesies and soft blankets felt like a cruel reminder of the life she had envisioned, a life where Derek would be by her side, lovingly holding their baby. Now that dream was shattered. Before she could dwell on it, a sharp, searing pain shot through her abdomen. Elena gasped, clutching the edge of the crib for support. The pain intensified, rolling over her in waves. She was going into labor. Panic coursed through her as she reached for her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed Derek's number. He picked up after a few rings. "What is it?" She struggled to steady her voice. "Derek, it's time." The baby, a sharp cry escaped her lips as another contraction hit. There was a pause. Then, "Fine. I'll meet you at the hospital." Then the line went dead. No concern. No urgency. Just indifference. Tears blurred Elena's vision as she realized even in this moment, when she needed him the most, he was still emotionally absent. With great difficulty, she called Maya, who rushed over immediately. "I'm here, sweetheart," Maya reassured her, wrapping an arm around her. "You don't need him. I've got you." The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital stung Elena's eyes as she was wheeled into the labor ward. Her body was racked with pain, the contractions growing more intense. Even through the haze of agony, one truth remained: Derek was not by her side. Every time the door opened, she hoped to see him. But he never came. Instead, Maya held her hand, whispering encouragement. Just when Elena had given up hope that Derek would appear, the door finally swung open. Relief flooded her, then vanished. He wasn't alone. A man in a suit, his lawyer, stood beside him, holding a folder. Elena's heart dropped. "Derek." Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't look at her. He placed the folder on the bedside table. "Sign these," he said flatly. Confusion and shock warred within her. She opened the folder with trembling hands. "Divorce papers, you're doing this now?" she asked, voice cracked with disbelief. "It's better this way," he replied. "I've already moved on. I don't want to keep pretending." Elena couldn't breathe. She couldn't comprehend how someone could be so cruel to hand a woman divorce papers while she was in labor. Maya stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. "You're a monster," she spat. "You don't deserve a woman like Elena." Derek merely shrugged. "She'll get over it." Then he turned and walked out, leaving Elena broken, alone, and in the worst pain of her life. Hours passed in a blur. Elena gave everything she had left for one final push, and then a baby's wail filled the room. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed her son on her chest. He was tiny, fragile, perfect. "You're safe now, my baby," she whispered. But he had no father to welcome him. The heartbreak was too much. Darkness crept into her vision, and everything went black. When she woke hours later, Maya sat beside her, holding the baby. "You scared me," Maya murmured. "But you and your son are going to be okay." Elena blinked, then remembered. The divorce. The abandonment. But when she looked at her baby, her son, her only light in the darkness, she made a promise. "I will never let him feel unwanted. I will never let him know what it's like to be abandoned," because no matter what, she would fight for her child, even if she had to do it alone. The hospital room was eerily quiet in the early hours of the morning, except for the soft crying of Elena's newborn son. The world outside was still asleep, unaware of the storm raging inside her heart. She lay motionless on the stiff hospital bed, exhaustion and heartbreak weighing her down like an iron shackle. Her body was weak from labor, but her spirit felt even more broken. The absence of Derek was louder than any words he could have spoken. He had left her in the most vulnerable moment of her life, tossing her aside as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. A bitter tear slipped down her cheek as she watched her baby sleep peacefully in the bassinet beside her. He had no idea that his father had already abandoned him before he even had a chance to feel his warmth. Elena clenched the hospital sheet in her fist, anger simmering beneath the surface of her grief. She had spent years devoted to Derek, sacrificing for their life together, only to be discarded at the moment she needed him the most. The sound of the door creaking open pulled Elena from her thoughts. Maya stepped inside, her expression a mix of sadness and fury. She had been Elena's rock through the entire ordeal, never leaving her side even when Derek had. "How are you feeling?" Maya asked softly, setting a fresh bouquet of flowers on the small bedside table. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. "Empty," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya sat beside her, reaching for her hand. "You don't have to be strong right now, Elena. You just gave birth. You've been through hell. It's okay to fall apart. Elena let out a shaky breath, her eyes fixating on her baby. I just don't understand how he could do this. How could a man turn his back on his wife and child so easily? Maya's jaw tightened. Because he's a coward. But you're stronger than you think. You don't need him, Elena. You never did. Elena let her friend's words settle over her, feeling their truth seep into her bones. Maybe she was stronger than she believed. Maybe Derek's absence wasn't the loss she had been mourning, but a blessing in disguise. The hospital discharge process felt like an eternity. Elena sat on the edge of the bed signing forms with one hand while cradling her newborn with the other. She had barely processed what had happened before being thrust into another harsh reality. Derek had not only abandoned her emotionally but financially as well. When the nurse handed her the bill, her heart sank. The numbers blurred before her eyes, an overwhelming reminder of how drastically her life had changed in just a few days. She had always assumed Derek would handle things, that they were a family. But now she was a single mother with no financial support. Maya, who had been flipping through her phone, looked up and noticed Elena's distressed expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. Elena swallowed hard. "Derek didn't pay the hospital bill. I don't have enough money to cover all of this." The weight of it all came crashing down on her. She had no job, no income, and nowhere to go. Derek had not only walked away, he had ensured she had nothing to stand on. Maya didn't hesitate. "I'll cover it," she said firmly, grabbing her purse. Elena's eyes widened. "No, Maya, I can't let you. You don't have a choice," Maya interrupted. "You have a newborn to take care of, and the last thing you need to worry about is money right now. You can pay me back when you're on your feet." Elena felt a lump form in her throat, the kindness overwhelming her. "I don't know what I would do without you." Maya squeezed her hand. "You'll never have to find out." With that, she paid the bill, and the nurse finalized Elena's discharge papers. The moment they stepped outside, the cold air hit Elena like a slap to the face. It was as if the universe was reminding her that life had changed. She wasn't returning to the home she and Derek had built together. She wasn't stepping into a warm, loving family. Instead, she was walking into an uncertain future, carrying all the weight alone. Maya's apartment was small, but to Elena it felt like a sanctuary. It was a temporary home, a safe place where she could breathe and figure out her next steps. She sat on the couch, rocking her baby in her arms while Maya prepared tea in the kitchen. "You're not staying here forever," Maya called over her shoulder. "You're going to get back on your feet, get a job, and build a life for you and your son." Elena let out a tired laugh. "And here I thought you were going to let me wallow in misery for a while." Maya walked over, handing her a cup of tea. "Nope, wallowing is for the weak. And you, my friend, are anything but weak." Elena looked down at her baby, his tiny fingers curled into fists. She had never imagined raising a child alone, but she had no choice. She couldn't afford to stay broken. She had to fight for him. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "I have no job, no income, and I'm drowning in medical bills." Maya gave her a pointed look. "Then start somewhere. You're smart, Elena. You have a degree. You've helped Derek with his business for years. Use those skills and rebuild your life. Make that man regret ever walking away from you." Elena took a deep breath, determination settling in her bones. Derek thought she was weak, but he was wrong. He had left her at her lowest, believing she would never rise again. But she would not for revenge, not to prove anything to him, but because she owed it to herself and her son. "I will," she finally said, looking up at Maya with newfound resolve. "I'll make sure Derek regrets the day he ever turned his back on me." And in that moment, Elena made a silent promise to herself, to her baby, and to the universe. She wouldn't just survive this, she would come back stronger than ever. The first few weeks were the hardest. Elena barely had time to grieve her broken marriage, because every second was consumed by caring for her newborn. The sleepless nights blurred into exhausting days, her body still weak from childbirth. Every cry from her son reminded her that she was now his only protector, his only provider. There was no father to wake up at night and help her, no loving partner to share the burden. It was just her rocking him back and forth in the darkness, whispering promises that she would find a way to give him a good life. The pain of Derek's betrayal still clung to her like a heavy shadow, but she refused to let it define her. She had spent too much time drowning in the hurt. Now she had to focus on surviving. But survival was brutal. The reality of her financial situation hit her hard when she checked her bank account. Nothing. Derek had made sure she had nothing to fall back on. The money she thought they had saved together gone. Any joint accounts, he had cleared them before she could even think to fight for her share. She sat at Maya's small dining table, her hands clutching a notepad filled with potential job ideas. But none seemed realistic. Who would hire a new mother with no recent work experience and no childcare? As if sensing her distress, Maya sat across from her, stirring her tea with a thoughtful expression. "I know this is overwhelming," she said gently. "But you need a plan, Elena. You can't let him win." Elena let out a hollow laugh. "He already has. He stripped me of everything, my home, my security, my dignity." Maya shook her head firmly. "No, he didn't. He only took what he thought was valuable, but he underestimated you. You still have your mind, your skills, and your determination. Use them." Elena wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe she was still capable of building something for herself, but where would she even start? She exhaled deeply and whispered, "I just want to be okay again." Maya reached over, squeezing her hand. "Then let's start making that happen." A week later, hope arrived in an unexpected way. As Elena scrolled through job listings on her phone, frustration gnawed at her. Every listing either required experience she didn't have or offered a salary that wouldn't even cover daycare expenses. Just as she was about to give up for the night, a message popped up on her phone from an old college acquaintance, Jonas. They hadn't spoken in years, but she remembered him as one of the kindest people she had met during university. His message was simple: "Hey Elena, I heard about everything. I'm really sorry for what you're going through. If you need any help, let me know." At first she hesitated. She wasn't the type to ask for handouts, and she had too much pride to let anyone pity her. But she was desperate, and Jonas worked in the corporate world. Maybe he could point her in the right direction. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "Hey Jonas, thanks for reaching out. Actually, I'm looking for a job. Anything that pays decently. Do you know of any openings?" The response came quicker than she expected. "Actually, I do. My company is looking for an administrative assistant. It's not glamorous, but the pay is steady, and the hours are flexible. Would you be interested?" Elena's hands trembled as she read the message. An opportunity, a chance to rebuild. "Maya," she called, her voice shaking. Her friend rushed over, concern etched on her face. "What happened?" Maya asked. Elena turned the phone toward her, barely able to contain her emotions. "Jonas, he's offering me a job." Maya's face lit up. "Are you serious? That's amazing. What did you say?" Elena swallowed hard. "I haven't said anything yet. What if I can't do it? What if I fail?" Maya took the phone from her hands and typed a response before Elena could protest. "Yes, I'm interested. When can I come in for an interview?" She hit send and smiled. "You're going to do this, Elena, because you have no other choice but to succeed." The day of the interview, Elena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the only professional outfit she had left. It was slightly loose from the weight she had lost over the past few weeks, but it would have to do. Her nerves were on edge, not just because she hadn't interviewed in years, but because she knew she had to succeed. This wasn't just about her anymore. This job was the key to giving her son a future. She kissed her baby's forehead before handing him to Maya. "Mommy's going to make sure you have everything you need," she whispered, her heart aching as she stepped out the door. The office building was intimidating, a glass tower filled with people who looked like they had their lives together. But she pushed down her self-doubt and walked inside. When she finally met Jonas, he greeted her with a warm smile. "Elena, it's great to see you," he said, pulling her in for a brief hug. "You look great." She let out a nervous laugh. "I don't feel great, but I'm here." Jonas gestured for her to sit. "Listen, I won't make this hard for you. I already know you're smart and hardworking. I just need to know, are you ready for this?" Elena's throat tightened. Was she ready? The old her would have said yes without hesitation, but the new her, the broken, abandoned woman, was terrified of failing. Still, she met his gaze and forced herself to nod. I have to be. He studied her for a moment, then slid a contract across the desk. Then welcome to the team. Her breath caught. Wait, I got the job. Jonas chuckled. Of course. I wouldn't have called you if I didn't believe in you. The relief that flooded through her was overwhelming. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward rebuilding her life. As she shook his hand, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about proving Derek wrong anymore. This was about proving to herself that she was stronger than he ever gave her credit for. Derek sat in his sleek office, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the city skyline without truly seeing it. Everything should have been perfect. He had a new life, a beautiful woman by his side, and complete freedom from the suffocating responsibilities of marriage and fatherhood. Yet, for some reason, an unshakable unease settled in his chest. Business had been slow. Deals that once came effortlessly were now slipping through his fingers. Investors were hesitant. Partners were pulling back. And suddenly, his once thriving company was facing an unexpected financial strain. It started small missed targets, delayed contracts, but now the losses were piling up. His company was built on trust, and that trust was cracking. Derek, we need to talk, his business partner, Raymond, said, stepping into the office. Derek exhaled, placing the glass down. If it's about the deal with Crest Holdings, I've already. Raymond cut him off, his tone sharp. And they're not the only ones. Word is spreading that you're unstable, unreliable. Investors don't trust you anymore. Derek stiffened. What the hell are you talking about? Raymond dropped a folder onto Derek's desk, his jaw tight with frustration. This is your reputation. You think no one noticed what you did to Alina? You left your pregnant wife at the worst possible time, and people saw it. They talked, Derek. No one wants to do business with a man who abandons his responsibilities so easily. The words hit him like a slap, but he refused to believe it. That's ridiculous, he scoffed, flipping through the document. This is business. My personal life has nothing to do with it. Raymond crossed his arms. That's where you're wrong. Business is built on relationships, trust, loyalty. You've shown the world you don't honor your commitments. If you could throw away your wife and child like they meant nothing, what's stopping you from doing the same to your business partners? Derek clenched his fists, but deep down, he felt the sting of the truth. His decision to discard Alina so cruelly was now coming back to haunt him in ways he never expected. Fix this, Raymond warned before walking out. Derek exhaled heavily, a flicker of regret creeping into his mind. He had thought divorcing Elena would set him free. Instead, it seemed like he had unknowingly set himself up for failure. Renee adjusted her diamond bracelet, admiring the way it sparkled under the restaurant's chandelier. She had spent the last few months enjoying the luxuries Derek provided, from expensive shopping sprees to extravagant vacations. But lately things had changed. His business was crumbling, his attitude was growing more irritable, and worst of all, his money was drying up. The Derek who had once lavished her with gifts was now distracted, stressed, and barely paying attention to her. She didn't sign up for this. She had left other men for less. Taking a sip of her wine, she checked her phone, smiling at the message from a man named Vincent, her backup plan. Enjoying dinner? Derek asked, his voice flat, staring at her with eyes void of the adoration they once held. Barely, she replied, twirling a strand of hair. You've been so boring lately. All you talk about is work and problems. Where's the fun? Derek rubbed his temples. Forgive me for not entertaining you while my business is falling apart. Renee rolled her eyes. See, this is what I mean. You're a mess. This isn't what I signed up for, Derek. His jaw tightened. What you signed up for. You're my girlfriend, not a business associate. She smirked. That's where you're wrong. This was always transactional. You gave me a life of luxury, and I kept you entertained. But now you're losing everything. He stared at her, disbelief and fury mixing in his expression. So what? You're just going to leave? She leaned in, her voice dripping with cruelty. I already have. Pulling out her phone, she turned the screen toward him. A message thread with Vincent was open, intimate. flirtatious, undeniable proof of betrayal. "He's got more money than you," she said casually. "And he doesn't come with baggage." Derek felt his stomach drop. He had sacrificed everything for this woman, left his wife, his child, his home. And now, he was the one being discarded like trash. Renee stood grabbing her purse. "Good luck with your little crisis," she said over her shoulder before walking away. As Derek sat there, humiliated and alone, the reality sank in. He had thrown away a diamond for a worthless rock. The walls of his penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt empty and suffocating. He sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He had lost everything, his business, his reputation, and now even Renee. For the first time since leaving Elena, regret settled deep in his chest. He had convinced himself that divorcing her was the right choice, that he deserved someone more exciting, someone who didn't burden him with responsibility. But now he saw the truth. He had abandoned the only person who had ever truly loved him. He reached for his phone, hesitating before scrolling through his contacts. His finger hovered over Elena's name. How long had it been since he last called her? Since he last heard her voice? He had been so wrapped up in his new life that he hadn't even bothered to check on her. Did she hate him? Had she moved on? The thought of her being with another man made his stomach twist in a way he didn't understand. Taking a deep breath, he dialed her number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. She had blocked him. A frustrated sigh escaped him as he tossed his phone onto the bed. He had always assumed she would be waiting, that she would crumble without him. But it seemed like she was doing just fine without him. That thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He rubbed his temples, a sudden desperation creeping in. He needed to see her, to talk to her. Maybe he could fix things. Maybe she would take him back. He grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding. It was time to face her. He didn't know what he would say, but he had to see her before it was too late. Derek drove through the city streets, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. A sinking feeling clawed at his chest, one he hadn't felt in years. Anxiety. It was ridiculous, really. He had been so sure Elena would never recover from losing him, that she would be shattered beyond repair, waiting for the day he came back. But now, after weeks of silence, of being ignored, of knowing she had blocked him, doubt gnawed at his mind. What if she truly had moved on? What if she no longer cared? His jaw clenched at the thought. He hadn't planned what he would say. He hadn't rehearsed any apologies. He just needed to see her, to confirm for himself that she wasn't as unaffected as she seemed. Pulling up in front of Elena's apartment, he hesitated. What was he expecting? That she would open the door and fall into his arms, relieved that he had finally returned. No, that wasn't Elena, not anymore. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and knocked on the door, bracing himself for the moment he would lay eyes on her again. When the door finally swung open, his breath caught in his throat. She looked different. Not in a drastic way, but in a way that unsettled him. The Elena who once clung to his every word, who looked at him with love and devotion, was gone. The woman in front of him was poised, confident, and entirely unaffected by his presence. She wore a fitted blouse and sleek pants, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. And worst of all, she wasn't alone. Holding the baby in her arms, she glanced at him. But before he could speak, another voice interrupted. "Elena, is everything okay?" Jonas appeared behind her, his gaze sharp as he took in Derek's presence. Derek felt his stomach twist. Who the hell is this? Elena gave a small nod, adjusting the baby in her arms. Yes, I was just about to leave. She didn't invite him in. She didn't look flustered or nervous. Instead, she turned back to Jonas. Can you grab the diaper bag? Derek felt something inside him snap. Elena, we need to talk. She barely glanced at him. I don't see what there is to talk about. Derek had expected coldness, even anger, but indifference rattled him. She treated him like a stranger, like a man she had already erased from her life. And Jonas, who was he? Derek couldn't ignore the easy way he stood beside Elena, the way he moved as if he belonged in her life. A sickening realization hit him. He had been replaced. His hands curled into fists at his sides as he stepped forward. "Elena, don't do this. We were married. I deserve to talk to you." She let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Deserve? Funny how you only remember that now." Her words stung, but he pushed forward. "I made mistakes." "I know that, but mistakes." She raised an eyebrow, adjusting her hold on the baby. "You abandoned me while I was giving birth, Derek. You handed me divorce papers when I was at my weakest. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. And I made mine. I moved on." Her words were final, like a door being slammed shut. Jonas cleared his throat. "Elena, we should get going. We don't want to be late." Derek's jaw tightened as he watched Jonas hand her the diaper bag. They had plans together. His blood boiled at the thought of another man stepping into his place, being the one beside Elena and his child. "Is he the reason you're acting like this?" Derek snapped. "Is he the reason you won't even hear me out?" Elena's eyes darkened. "No, Derek, you're the reason." She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "You expected me to be broken forever, to be waiting for you to realize you made a mistake. But I don't need to wait. I'm doing just fine without you." Those words cut deeper than he expected. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply didn't care anymore. And for the first time, Derek realized he had lost her for good. Elena walked away without another glance, leaving Derek standing there, hollow and shaken. The moment the door shut behind her, he felt the weight of his own arrogance crash down on him. He had convinced himself that she would always be there, waiting in the wreckage of their broken marriage. But she had rebuilt herself. She wasn't a woman scorned. She was a woman who had risen. Derek drove home, but the silence of his empty penthouse felt suffocating. The walls that once represented success now felt like a prison. She didn't need him anymore. That realization gnawed at his mind, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Meanwhile, Elena felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had expected to feel anger when she saw Derek, expected her heart to ache. But instead, she felt nothing. The pain he had caused her no longer held power over her. She had her son, her career, and a future that didn't include a man who had proven he wasn't worthy of her love. That evening, as she held her baby in her arms, she whispered, "We're going to be okay, sweetheart. We already are." Maya, who had been watching her carefully, smiled. "You really have moved on, haven't you?" Elena exhaled deeply, nodding. "Yes. And it feels liberating." She wasn't naive. She knew Derek wouldn't give up so easily. He was too used to having control, too used to women bending to his will. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had fought too hard to rebuild herself, to rediscover her worth. And if he thought he could worm his way back into her life, he was in for a rude awakening. Because Elena wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Derek sat in his dimly lit penthouse, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table in front of him. The silence was deafening. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He had built his entire world on control over his business, his image, and most of all, his relationships. Women always fell back into his arms no matter what he did. But Elena was different. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even hate him. She simply moved on. That fact ate away at him like poison. He had been so certain that she would always be there, waiting in the ruins of their marriage. But now she was thriving without him. Worse still, there was another man in the picture. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jonas standing next to Elena, handing her the diaper bag like it was his place, like it was his child. Rage boiled inside Derek at the thought. He hadn't just lost his wife, he had lost his family. The realization shattered what was left of his ego. He picked up his phone and called Elena again, his heart pounding. Ring, ring, straight to voicemail. He let out a frustrated groan, running a hand down his face. He had never been ignored before. His entire life, he had been the one with the upper hand, the one making the decisions. But now Elena had shut him out completely. Desperation clawed at him. He needed to see her, needed to talk to her, needed to make her listen. Without thinking, He grabbed his car keys and stormed out. Minutes later, he was outside her apartment, his heart racing. He knocked on the door harder than necessary. The door swung open, and instead of Elena, it was Jonas. The sight of him in her space, in her life, standing in the home that should have been his, sent a wave of fury crashing over him. "Where is Elena?" Derek demanded, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. Jonas's expression remained calm, but his stance was firm. "She doesn't want to see you, Derek." The next blow came swiftly and without warning, a custody battle. The moment Derek received the court papers, his blood ran cold. Elena was filing for full custody. He hadn't expected this. He had assumed that no matter how much time had passed, he would always have access to his child. Now Elena was taking that away from him. The hearing was scheduled within weeks, and as he sat in the courtroom, watching Elena walk in with confidence he had never seen before, terrible thoughts settled in his mind. He might actually lose. His lawyer leaned over. "We need to paint her as unstable, financially incapable. If we argue that she can't provide a secure home for the child, we might have a shot." But as Derek looked at Elena, at the poised, unshaken woman who barely even glanced at him, he realized something chilling. She was ready for this fight. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Derek, your former wife has provided evidence that you abandoned her during childbirth and failed to support her financially. Do you deny these claims?" Derek opened his mouth, but for the first time in his life he had nothing to say. Elena's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we also have documentation proving that Mr. Derek attempted to cut off Mrs. Elena's financial access while she was still pregnant, leaving her in a vulnerable state." The judge turned to Derek, eyes sharp. "Is this true?" His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, my client is." "This true?" the judge repeated. Derek felt the walls closing in. He had walked away believing he was untouchable, but now, in this cold courtroom, he was nothing more than a man facing the consequences of his own cruelty. The ruling came down swiftly. Elena was granted full custody. Derek sat in stunned silence as the judge's words rang in his ears. "Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Derek has failed in his parental duties. The court sees no reason to grant him custody or visitation rights at this time." A hush fell over the room. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood, gathered her things, and walked away. Derek's lawyer turned to him. "We can appeal." His voice trailed off. They both knew an appeal would be pointless. Derek had built his downfall with his own hands. As he walked out of the courtroom, he spotted Elena in the hallway, speaking quietly with her lawyer. Jonas stood beside her, holding her bag. The image sent a fresh wave of humiliation crashing over him. She had replaced him so effortlessly, and now he wasn't just her ex-husband, he was nothing. Desperation clawed at his throat as he stepped toward her. "Elena," he called, his voice raw. She turned her gaze unreadable. "Please, I know I was wrong. I know I don't deserve anything from you." But she lifted a hand, silencing him. "You're right," she said softly. "You don't deserve anything from me." The finality in her voice crushed him. She turned away, walking out of his life for good, and as Derek stood there alone, drowning in the wreckage of his own choices, he finally understood the weight of his actions. He had spent his whole life believing he was untouchable, but in the end he had destroyed himself. Derek had never known what rock bottom felt like until now. The world that once bowed at his feet had turned its back on him, leaving him standing in the ruins of his arrogance. His company was collapsing, his reputation was in shambles, and now the one thing he never imagined losing, his son, had been taken from him by the very woman he had once discarded. He sat in his penthouse staring at the eviction notice in his hands. Eviction, the word sent a cold wave through his veins. Just months ago he had been the man with everything: wealth, power, influence. Now he was drowning in debt, creditors knocking at his door, investors pulling out, and his once loyal employees abandoning ship. It was poetic, really. He had built his success on ruthlessness, believing he was invincible. Yet here he was, powerless. He clenched the paper in his fist, his mind racing. The penthouse wasn't just a home. It was his last piece of dignity. Losing it meant losing the final shred of his old life. A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he was met with a face that only added salt to his wounds. Raymond, his former business partner. "I warned you, Derek," Raymond said, stepping inside uninvited. His voice was calm, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. "I told you that your actions had consequences, but you thought you were untouchable." Derek let out a bitter laugh. "Spare me the lecture, Raymond. Unless you're here to offer help, get out." Raymond crossed his arms. "Help? You expect me to help you after you burned every bridge, Derek? No one trusts you anymore. Investors don't want to be associated with you. Your name is toxic, and now, with this custody battle making headlines, even the few remaining partners you had left are cutting ties." Derek's chest tightened. "I can fix this," he muttered, though he barely believed his own words. Raymond shook his head. "You had a good woman, a beautiful child, and an empire, but you threw it all away. Now you're just a man with nothing." With that, he walked out, leaving Derek standing in the silence of his crumbling world. Elena stood in front of the real estate office, her heart pounding in her chest. Today was the day. Today she would reclaim her power. She took a deep breath, adjusting her blazer before stepping inside. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. "Miss Elena, the paperwork is ready for your final approval." Elena nodded, following her into the office. She was buying the penthouse, the very home Derek had once thrown her out of. The irony wasn't lost on her. When she first heard it was on the market due to his financial troubles, she had hesitated. Part of her wondered if it was even worth it, if she should just let it go and focus on her new life. But then, she realized this wasn't about revenge. This was about closure. She wasn't just buying a property, she was erasing the last remnants of his control over her life. As she signed the final document, a weight lifted off her shoulders. This was her victory. Later that evening, she stood outside the building, watching as movers cleared out the last of Derek's belongings. He was there too, standing off to the side, looking completely out of place. He looked thinner, drained, a shell of the man who had once held so much power. When his eyes met hers, something flickered in them: shame, regret, maybe even desperation. "So it's true," he said, his voice hoarse. "You bought it." Elena tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I did." His jaw tightened. "You really hate me that much?" She let out a soft laugh, but there was no malice in it. "No, Derek. I don't hate you. I just don't think about you anymore." That truth seemed to hit him harder than any insult. He swallowed hard, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but you're right," Elena cut in. "You don't." She turned away, her heart light. This wasn't about hurting him. It was about finally letting go. And as she walked away from him, she knew this was the last time she would ever look back. Derek had never begged for anything in his life, but tonight, as he stood outside Elena's new home, he was a desperate man. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. He had lost everything: his career, his wealth, his home, but nothing hurt more than losing her. When the door finally opened, Elena stood there, her expression calm, unreadable. "Derek," she said, her tone neutral. "What are you doing here?" His throat felt dry. "I need to talk to you, please," she sighed, stepping outside and closing the door behind her. "I don't know what you expect me to say," she said, crossing her arms. "You made your choices, Derek. Now you have to live with them." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I was stupid. I let greed, pride, and selfishness destroy the best thing in my life. I thought leaving you would set me free, but all it did was ruin me." She watched him carefully, but there was no trace of the woman who had once loved him in her eyes. "I won't deny that what you did hurt me," she admitted, "but I healed, and I learned that I never needed you. I only thought I did." The words cut deep. He had spent so long believing she would always be his, that she would crumble without him. But she had flourished. "Is there nothing I can say to change things?" he asked, his voice laced with desperation. Elena gave him a sad smile. "No, Derek. You were my past, but I've moved on." With that, she stepped back inside and closed the door. Derek stood there, staring at the closed door, the finality of it sinking in. He had spent his life chasing power, wealth, and status, but in the end he had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Elena sat on the balcony of her new home, sipping a cup of warm tea, as the sun began its slow descent over the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, a scent that reminded her of new beginnings. She glanced down at her son, who was nestled in his stroller, cooing softly as he played with his tiny fingers. This was her life now, peaceful, secure, and entirely her own. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of Derek's betrayal pressing down on her. She had fought, survived, and come out stronger than she ever thought possible. And she had done it all without him. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened the door, she found Jonas standing there, holding a small bouquet of lilies. His usual confidence was softened by something else, something almost hesitant. "I know you don't like surprises," he said with a small grin, "but I saw these and thought they might brighten your day." Elena took the flowers, warmth spreading through her chest. "They already did," she said softly. Jonas had been there for her in ways no one else had. He had offered her support without expectations, friendship without conditions. And now, as she looked at him, she realized something had shifted between them. She wasn't just grateful for him, she wanted him in her life. More than that, she was ready. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked, her voice steady. Jonas's smile widened. "I'd love to." And just like that, Elena allowed herself to open a door she had kept shut for so long. A new chapter was beginning. Derek sat in his car, parked a few houses down from Elena's new home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had no idea why he had driven there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the unbearable realization that he had lost her forever. Through the window he could see the faint glow of lights inside. He could see Elena moving around with ease, a small, genuine smile on her face. And then he saw him, Jonas, sitting at her dining table, laughing at something she had said, comfortable at home. Derek's stomach twisted violently. He had once occupied that space, had once been the man who made her laugh, who sat at that table, who held her at night. But now he was just an outsider, looking in. His breathing grew heavy, his chest tightening with something he couldn't control, jealousy. He had assumed Elena would always belong to him in some way, even if they weren't together. But she had moved on without him. She had rebuilt a life, and now another man was in it. The realization was a sharp, brutal wound, one that made his hands tremble. A memory flashed in his mind, Elena in the hospital, weak and heartbroken, staring at him as he handed her divorce papers. Back then, he hadn't cared. Back then, he had thought he was trading up. But now, as he sat in his car, watching another man step into the role he had so carelessly thrown away, he felt the sting of his own foolishness. With one last, bitter glance at the home that no longer belonged to him, he started the engine and drove away, leaving behind the one thing he would never get back. Elena stood in the middle of her living room, balloons and decorations hanging from the ceiling, laughter and conversation filling the air. Today was her son's first birthday. It was a milestone she had dreamed of, one that symbolized not just his growth, but her own. A year ago, she had been abandoned in a hospital bed, left to face motherhood alone. A year ago, she had been broken, uncertain, drowning in heartache. But today she was whole. She looked around at the people surrounding her, Maya, who had been her unwavering support, Jonas, who had become a steady presence in her life, and a small group of new friends she had made at work. These were people who truly cared for her. They weren't here because they had to be, they were here because they wanted to be. She felt a gentle hand on her arm and turned to find Jonas standing beside her, his gaze warm. "You did it, Elena," he said, his voice soft. "You built something beautiful." Her chest tightened at his words, at the quiet truth in them. She had spent so long believing that she needed Derek to complete her, but she had been complete all along. "Thank you," she whispered, emotion thick in her throat. Jonas smiled. "Always." As the party continued, Elena held her son in her arms, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "We made it, baby," she murmured. "And we're never looking back." And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, she knew she had won. Derek walked through the bustling city streets, the weight of his failures pressing down on him like an unbearable burden. His clothes were no longer the tailored suits he once prided himself on. His shoes, once polished and pristine, were scuffed from the endless walking. He had been doing walking with no direction, with no real destination. He had lost everything: the lavish lifestyle, the respect of his people, the power he once wielded so effortlessly. It was all gone. And worst of all, Elena was gone. She hadn't just left him behind, she had erased him from her life. He had tried, in moments of desperation, to reach out to her, but she never responded. She had moved forward while he was stuck in the ruins of his own arrogance. As he turned the corner, his breath caught in his throat. Parked in front of an upscale cafe was a sleek, luxurious car, and stepping out of it was Elena. She looked radiant, her posture confident, her expression serene. But what shattered him the most was the sight of Jonas beside her, opening the door for her with a protective ease that Derek had once possessed. The two of them stepped inside the cafe, their movements synchronized in a way that told him they were a team. Derek's chest tightened. He should have been the one walking beside her. He should have been the one she turned to when she laughed so effortlessly. But he had destroyed that chance. He took a hesitant step forward, but just as he did, Elena's gaze flickered to the window, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Time seemed to stand still. But instead of sadness, anger, or even nostalgia, there was nothing in her expression. No longing, no regret, just indifference. And that, more than anything, told Derek that he was no longer part of her story. She had finally, truly let him go. Elena leaned back in her chair, the cafe bustling around her as she stirred her tea, the warmth of the cup grounding her in the present. Across from her, Jonas watched her with quiet curiosity. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked. She exhaled, setting the spoon down. "Yes." There was no emotion in her voice, no lingering pain, just acknowledgement. Jonas nodded, understanding. "And how do you feel?" She took a moment to think about it, really think about it. A year ago, the mere thought of Derek had brought her to her knees. A year ago, she had felt like she was drowning in the wake of his betrayal. But now he was just another passerby in the grand story of her life. "I feel free," she finally said, a small smile playing on her lips. "For the first time, I don't feel the need to prove anything. I don't need revenge. I don't need closure. I don't need him." Jonas reached across the table, his fingers grazing hers. "You did it, Elena. You built something beautiful out of the ashes." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw everything she had been too scared to admit before. Love, safety, the promise of something real. This wasn't about replacing Derek. This was about choosing herself. And in choosing herself, she had opened the door to something greater. As she took a sip of her tea, a realization settled in her heart. This was the best revenge of all. Not anger, not hatred, but success, happiness, living a life so full and abundant that the person who once tried to break her became nothing more than a distant memory. And with that final thought, she turned to Jonas and smiled. "Let's go home." Because home was no longer a place tied to pain. Home was wherever she chose to be, and she had finally chosen joy. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.